March 12, 1945. Just outside a small village in western Germany, cold rain made the ground wet and sticky. The relentless downpour had transformed the once firm earth into a quagmire, clinging to boots and tank treads alike, as if the land itself resisted the war's intrusion. The war was almost done, but for the men in Lieutenant William Carr's tank, it didn't feel like it. Tucked inside the cramped, cold interior of their M4 Sherman, the crew faced the same tension that had haunted them through months of combat, an unshakable sense that danger was never far away. Carr looked through his binoculars. Smoke floated over fields from burning houses, curling upward in gray tendrils that mixed with the rain-soaked air. The air smelled of wet dirt, fuel, and gunpowder, a bitter, acrid combination that clung to their uniforms and stung their nostrils. Ahead, across a small hill, a group of people moved slowly through the field, mostly women and kids, some holding hands, some walking with difficulty, their steps faltering in the heavy mud that seemed to pull them back with every effort. A little kid fell into the mud, and a woman ran to help him, her movements frantic yet tender as she scooped the toddler into her arms, shielding him from the rain. Carr frowned. Behind them, hard to see, something shiny moved, a fleeting glint in the dim light that caught his trained eye. He looked closer. His heart sank. A hidden German machine gun, an MG-42, was behind a broken stone wall, its jagged edges barely concealing the weapon's menacing barrel. 2 Waffen-SS soldiers were there, their dark uniforms blending into the shadows of the ruined landscape. One, very young, aimed the gun at the people's backs, his posture rigid with intent. Another pushed an old woman forward, his rough shove forcing her to stumble as she struggled to keep up with the group. Carr's radio crackled, its static cutting through the tense silence inside the tank.
Ebru 4.
Don't shoot. I repeat, don't shoot. They might be civilians. Wait for orders. Carr put down the binoculars, his heart racing, pounding against his chest like a drumbeat of doubt and urgency. He had orders, but he could see. These people weren't running from Germans. They were being pushed, used as shields, herded like cattle toward a slaughter. If the Americans got close, the machine gun would fire and everyone, soldiers and villagers, would die in a hail of bullets that would tear through flesh and hope alike. He didn't talk. He grabbed the intercom, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Loader, get an explosive round. Aim left of the wall. Get ready to shoot. His hands shook, but not from fear. This wasn't a choice made in anger. It was calm, clear, a decision forged in the crucible of a moment where every second mattered. He was going to disobey, and by doing so, he would save a whole village, sparing dozens of lives from a fate he could already see unfolding in his mind's eye. Who is Carr? The man who picked right over rules. Before he ever got in a tank, before he used a radio or gave orders, William Carr was a farm boy from Kansas, raised in the heart of America's vast plains. He grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, where fields stretched far and sunsets glowed orange behind barns, painting the sky with a warmth that seemed to promise simpler days. His dad fought in the First World War, returning with stories of sacrifice and survival that shaped young William's view of duty. His mom worked at the post office, a steady presence in a community where life revolved around hard work and neighborly bonds. Carr never left the Midwest until the Army sent him away, pulling him from the familiar rhythm of rural life into the chaos of a world at war. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, he was 19, a young man whose life had been defined by the cycles of planting and harvest. 2 weeks later, he joined the Army, driven by a quiet resolve to do his part in a conflict that had shaken the world. By 21, he was training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, learning to drive and lead an M4 Sherman tank, mastering the complex machinery and tactics that would define his role in battle. He was a natural leader, calm, careful, liked by his men, not loud, not showy, just steady, like the Kansas horizon he'd grown up under. His teachers called him very disciplined, a soldier who thrived on structure and precision. He followed rules, studied every book, practiced every task until it was automatic, his hands moving with the muscle memory of countless drills. When others relaxed, Carr cleaned tank tracks or checked fuel lines, ensuring his crew's survival depended on no detail being overlooked. Orders were everything to him. In war, rules kept you alive. You did what you were told. You followed the chain of command. You didn't act on your own or question a boss, for to do so risked not just your life but those of your comrades. He wasn't the type to rebel, his character forged in the discipline of farm life and military training. But one day, that's exactly what he did, stepping beyond the boundaries of protocol to answer a higher call. By 1945, Carr was a first lieutenant with Bravo Company, 2nd Armored Division, called Hell on Wheels, a name that echoed their relentless advance across Europe's battlefields. He fought in France, moved to Belgium, and went deep into Germany's Rhineland, each campaign etching new scars on his understanding of war's brutal realities. He saw men die from waiting too long, bad choices, or unclear orders, moments where hesitation or misjudgment turned opportunity into tragedy. So when the order came near the village of Kalstat, "Don't shoot," he knew why. Command didn't want to kill civilians by mistake, a fear rooted in the war's grim history of collateral damage. Carr understood the order. He respected it, recognizing the weight of responsibility it carried. But this time, he saw something headquarters couldn't, a truth visible only to those on the front line, where the stakes were measured in heartbeats and human lives. That sight made him choose between the rules he always followed and people he didn't know but could save. William Carr, the rule follower, the loyal soldier who always saluted, was about to break everything he believed in, shattering the framework of obedience that had defined his service. Because in war, some moments are bigger than orders, moments where the heart and conscience override the cold logic of protocol, demanding action in the face of imminent tragedy. "Why don't shoot" was the order. By spring 1945, the war in Europe was almost over, its final chapter unfolding amidst the ruins of a crumbling Third Reich. Allied forces were deep in Western Germany, and the German army was falling apart, its once formidable structure reduced to scattered remnants fighting for survival. But as victory got closer, the war got weirder and more dangerous, its clarity muddied by desperation and deception. The enemy didn't always wear uniforms, blending into the civilian population to confuse and ambush. German soldiers, especially the fierce Waffen-SS, sometimes dressed as civilians or forced women and kids to act as shields, exploiting the Allies' restraint to gain tactical advantage. In the last weeks, they fought out of desperation, not plans, their actions driven by a fanatical refusal to surrender. For soldiers on the ground, it was hard to know who was friend or enemy, a fog of uncertainty that turned every encounter into a gamble. The U.S. Army knew this, having learned painful lessons from earlier battles. In many towns, when American tanks arrived, people waved white flags or seemed to, their intentions obscured by the chaos of war. But sometimes those flags were traps, lures designed to draw soldiers into deadly ambushes. A week before Carr's moment, another tank unit entered a quiet German village, its streets eerily silent. A child waved a cloth at the lead tank, a gesture that seemed to signal surrender. Then a grenade exploded inside, the child coerced into carrying the weapon that killed the crew. After that, commanders gave stricter orders. Don't shoot unless you're sure. Hold fire unless the enemy is clear, a directive meant to protect both soldiers and innocents. The radio called it updated rules of engagement, a bureaucratic phrase that masked its stark reality. But it meant, if you're not sure, wait, a pause that could mean life or death. Command didn't want to lose more men or cause a big problem, wary of the international outcry that followed civilian deaths. By then, the U.S. Army had learned, firepower wins fights, but mistakes lose wars, tarnishing victories with the stain of unintended loss. So the order came to all units in the Rhineland: don't shoot. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't open to debate. It was the rule, a line drawn to maintain order in a world spiraling into chaos. In theory, it made sense. War was messy, and rules kept it under control, providing a framework to navigate the unpredictable. You followed orders. You trusted the bigger plan, believing that those higher up had a broader view of the battlefield. If every soldier acted on their own, everything would fall apart, the chain of command unraveling into anarchy. For leaders at headquarters with maps and radios, the rule was logical, a safeguard against rash decisions that could cost lives or reputations. But for men like Carr, right at the front, things looked different, the reality of the battlefield far removed from the sterile lines on a map. Carr wasn't looking at a map. He was looking through binoculars at real people in a real village, their lives unfolding before him in vivid, heart-wrenching detail. He was close enough to see their faces, their fear, their movements, each expression a testament to the terror they endured. He could hear their voices, even if he didn't understand the words, the tone carrying a universal language of desperation. That day, what he saw told him everything. The civilians weren't running or scattering, as refugees might in the chaos of war. They were being pushed forward in a tight group toward the American side, their movements deliberate and controlled. To command, it might look like random movement, a chaotic exodus of frightened villagers. To Carr, it looked planned, controlled, forced, a sinister choreography orchestrated by hidden hands. Then he saw the machine gun team hiding, ready to shoot their own people when the Americans paused, a betrayal so cold it chilled him to the core. That moment changed everything, shattering the illusion of safety and exposing the brutal truth of the enemy's intent. Carr knew how ambushes worked. The setup was perfect, a textbook trap designed to exploit hesitation. The machine gun wasn't there to defend. It was there to kill during a retreat or worse, to slaughter, turning the field into a killing ground for both villagers and soldiers. If he followed orders and didn't shoot, those civilians would die, shot by their own side in a cruel act of sacrifice to cover the enemy's escape. Then the machine gun would fire at his men, too, cutting down his crew in a merciless barrage. It wouldn't just be a delay, it would be a disaster, a bloodbath that would haunt him forever. Carr had seen it before in France and Belgium, where he'd watched whole groups get killed in seconds because someone waited, paralyzed by doubt or protocol. Now it was happening again, and he could stop it, his position giving him the power to act where others could only watch. But stopping it meant breaking a direct order, defying the chain of command that had been his guiding star. It meant risking punishment, losing his rank, or even jail, consequences that loomed like storm clouds over his decision. The radio was clear, "Don't shoot." But to Carr, not shooting wasn't careful, it was giving up. It was letting it happen, allowing evil to triumph under the guise of obedience. Carr faced a tough choice. Shooting could mean trouble, a court-martial that could strip him of everything he'd worked for. But waiting could mean death, not just for the villagers but for his own men, who trusted him to lead them through the fire. In that moment, all the training, all the rules, all the salutes didn't matter. What mattered was a mom holding her child, her arms a fragile shield against the horrors of war, a soldier aiming a machine gun, his intent as clear as the weapon he held, and a tank leader who had to decide if following orders was worth 60 innocent lives. The weight of that choice pressed down on him, a burden no manual could prepare him for, no drill could simulate. The day Carr chose to shoot or not. March 12, 1945. The rain kept falling, a relentless drizzle that blurred the edges of the world. The village of Kalstat sat in a small valley between two hills, its modest homes and narrow lanes cradled by the rugged terrain. The trees were bare from winter, their skeletal branches stark against the gray sky, and the ground was soaked from melted snow and broken buildings, a landscape scarred by months of relentless fighting. Lieutenant William Carr sat in his Sherman tank's command seat, hearing rain tap on the metal, a soft rhythm that contrasted with the tension gripping his crew. He was told to stay put until foot soldiers caught up, a standard tactic to coordinate the advance. His crew was nervous but calm, their faces etched with the weariness of men who had seen too much but still trusted their leader. They'd done this before. They knew the routine, the rhythm of waiting and watching that defined their days. Carr looked through his binoculars and scanned the hill, his eyes trained to spot the slightest anomaly. He saw movement, a flicker of life in the desolate scene. About 24 people, mostly women and kids, appeared along the trees, their figures small against the vast, muddy field. Some carried white cloths on sticks, makeshift flags of surrender that fluttered weakly in the wind. Others walked empty-handed, eyes wide and scared, their faces pale and drawn with exhaustion. They moved toward the American side, toward Carr's tank, their steps heavy and uncertain. At first, it looked like they were giving up, a desperate bid for safety in a war-torn world. But something was off. The group stayed close together, too close, like they were being pushed, their formation unnaturally tight, as if guided by an unseen force. Carr zoomed in and saw it. Behind the group, hidden by burned wood, were 2 German soldiers in Waffen-SS uniforms, their presence a dark shadow in the rain. One held an MG-42 machine gun, its barrel gleaming faintly despite the gloom. The other had his rifle down and was waving, pushing the people forward, his gestures sharp and commanding. Carr's heart stopped, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. This wasn't a surrender. It was a trick, a calculated deception designed to exploit the Americans' restraint. The SS were using the villagers as shields, a human barrier to protect their escape. If the Americans didn't shoot, the SS could slip away unnoticed. If the Americans moved forward, the SS could shoot into the mess and run away in the chaos, leaving a trail of bodies behind. Worst of all, Carr realized the villagers could be killed anyway to hide the SS actions, their lives expendable in the enemy's ruthless calculus. He spoke into the intercom, his voice cutting through the tank's metallic hum. "Driver, keep the engine quiet. Gunner, look left. Stone wall behind the trees." Then the radio crackled, its urgency piercing the moment. "Bravo 4. Don't shoot. Repeat, don't shoot. Possible civilians. Wait for scouts to check." Carr blinked, the words echoing in his mind. That was the order he'd trained years to follow, the voice from command, higher than him, carrying the weight of authority he'd sworn to obey. He looked again at the field, his binoculars framing a scene of quiet horror. He saw a woman struggling to hold a baby under her coat, her arms trembling as she shielded the child from the rain. A boy no older than 5 tripped in the mud, his small frame swallowed by the earth's grip. The MG-42 stayed still, waiting, its silence more threatening than any sound. Carr didn't move. His crew looked at him, their eyes reflecting the same unease he felt. No one spoke because they saw it, too, the truth laid bare in the villagers' frightened faces and the soldiers' hidden menace. Carr spoke into the intercom again. "Loader, explosive round. Load it now." The loader hesitated, his voice tinged with doubt. "Sir, we just got the don't shoot order." Carr didn't pause, his resolve unshaken. "I see a machine gun nest behind the civilians. They're being forced forward. This isn't practice. Load the round." The gunner looked at him through the scope, catching his gaze in the dim light of the tank's interior. He saw Carr's face, a mask of calm determination. This wasn't fear or anger. It was clear thinking, a decision born of necessity and clarity. The loader pushed the shell in, the metallic clank a prelude to action. The turret moved slightly, aligning with precision honed by countless drills. Carr gave the order, "Fire!" The sound was loud, a thunderous roar that shook the tank and reverberated across the valley. Dirt and stone exploded behind the trees, a violent eruption that shattered the deceptive calm. Screams came from the hill, not from the villagers but from the German soldiers hit by the blast, their trap undone in an instant. Carr looked through binoculars again, his breath catching as he surveyed the aftermath. The MG-42 was gone, reduced to twisted metal and debris. So were the soldiers, their threat extinguished. The villagers dropped to the ground in shock but weren't hurt, their bodies pressed into the mud as if seeking refuge in the earth itself. One woman covered her child, her arms a protective cocoon. A teenage boy raised his arms, a gesture of surrender or relief. A little girl cried, not from pain, but from surprise, her sobs a fragile echo of survival. They were alive. Carr breathed out for the first time in minutes, the tension draining from his body. His heart was still racing, a relentless pulse that matched the rhythm of the rain. His hands gripped the hatch, knuckles white with the weight of what he'd done. He had disobeyed, and it worked, the gamble paying off in lives preserved rather than lost. The foot soldiers arrived minutes later, their boots slogging through the mud as they swept the hill. There was no more shooting, no fight, just burned ground where the trap had been, a silent testament to Carr's decision. Carr got out and walked toward the villagers, his steps heavy with the weight of the moment. An old man came to him first, his weathered face a map of fear and gratitude. He looked confused, scared, then thankful, his eyes brimming with unspoken words. He spoke in German, which Carr didn't understand, but he heard one word, Kinder, meaning children, a single syllable that carried the weight of a village's survival. A woman grabbed Carr's arm, her touch both desperate and reverent. She pointed to the field where 2 dead German soldiers lay, their bodies still amidst the wreckage, then hugged him, her embrace a silent thank you that transcended language. He was shocked. He expected to be in trouble, to face questions from superiors who would scrutinize his actions. But he didn't expect thanks, the gratitude of strangers whose lives he'd saved with a single, defiant act. That night, as he cleaned the tank and wrote a letter home, he thought about what happened, the events replaying in his mind like a film reel. He had broken orders, but the order came from far away, based on wrong information, thinking the civilians weren't confirmed. Carr saw the truth, the tight group, the fear in their eyes, the armed men pushing them, the small shoves that betrayed the enemy's intent. It wasn't a guess. It was judgment honed by months of combat and an instinct for what was right. He knew he might face trouble later, the specter of a court-martial looming over him. But he also knew that if he had waited, those kids, those moms, maybe even his crew, would be dead, their lives snuffed out in a moment of hesitation. The order said, "Don't shoot." But Carr now believed not shooting sometimes let bad things win, and he didn't join the army for that, didn't leave his Kansas farm to stand by while innocents suffered. The investigation and the result. The next morning, Carr was called to the battalion command post, a makeshift tent that stood as a stark contrast to the battlefield's chaos. His crew didn't say much, their silence heavy with shared understanding. They knew what this was, a reckoning for a choice that defied protocol. Carr knew, too, the weight of his actions recorded in the unyielding clarity of radio logs. The radio logs showed he shot against orders, a fact that wasn't ignored in the U.S. Army, where discipline was the backbone of survival. The war was almost over, but rules still mattered, their enforcement a constant in a world of uncertainty. Carr walked into the tent and stood straight, his posture unwavering despite the mud still clinging to his boots, a reminder of the ground he'd stood on when he made his choice. Major Harold Winslow, his boss, sat behind a table, looking at papers, his face a mask of stern authority. "Lieutenant Carr, you got a no-shoot order at 2 p.m. yesterday. Why did your tank fire one explosive round at an unconfirmed target?" Carr didn't back down, his voice steady as he met the major's gaze. "Yes, sir. I saw a German MG-42 machine gun team behind civilians. I made a call to protect those people and my crew." The major raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of skepticism and scrutiny. "A call, Lieutenant? Do you know how many civilians have died from bad calls in this area?" Carr nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Yes, sir. I've seen it. That's why I shot. I've also seen what happens when we wait, when hesitation costs lives." There was a long pause, the silence filled only by the sound of rain hitting the tent, a soft counterpoint to the tension in the air. Major Winslow sighed and leaned back, his stern demeanor softening slightly. "We'll check your story. There'll be a full review. You might lose your command for now. Go." Carr saluted and left, his steps measured and deliberate. He didn't argue or plead, his heart at peace with the choice he'd made, even if its consequences were yet to unfold. But outside the command post, something surprising happened, a moment that shifted the narrative in ways Carr couldn't have anticipated. Villagers from Kalstat came to the American lines, their faces weary but determined. They held signs made from wood and torn cloth, their messages scrawled in shaky hands. One said in rough English, "Tank man saved us," a simple declaration that carried profound weight. Among them was the woman who grabbed his arm, her eyes still bright with gratitude, and a boy in a muddy coat, Hans, whose small frame had stumbled in the mud the day before. They asked to talk to someone in charge, their voices insistent despite their fear. A translator came, bridging the gap between languages. Their message was clear: the tank man saved our lives. He saw what others didn't, his eyes piercing through the deception that cloaked the enemy's intent. He shot only at soldiers, not us, his precision sparing the innocent while neutralizing the threat. If he had waited, we'd be dead, our lives extinguished in a moment of calculated cruelty. Carr didn't hear this directly, but the words spread fast, rippling through the ranks like a quiet tide of truth. 2 hours later, a scout team came back from the hill, their report confirming what Carr had seen. They found the machine gun nest, 2 dead Waffen-SS soldiers, and signs of a planned trap, extra ammo, camouflage, and tracks in the mud showing others had run away, their ambush thwarted by a single, decisive act. Even Major Winslow was quiet after reading the report. his stern facade giving way to a moment of reflection. He put it down and said to his aide, "Sometimes the front line sees more than we do," an acknowledgement that the battlefield's truth often lay beyond the reach of maps and radios. That evening, Carr was called back, the tension of the morning replaced by a quieter resolution. "You're not being charged, Lieutenant," the major said, his voice softer but firm. "You stay with your unit, and for what it's worth, I think you did right." Carr nodded, his relief tempered by the gravity of the moment. "Can I speak, sir?" "Go ahead. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just couldn't watch those people die." The major didn't answer right away, his silence a rare pause in the machinery of command. Then he said, "That's more than some can say. Keep going." Carr went back to his tank, the weight of the day settling into his bones. His crew welcomed him with quiet pats and a cup of cold coffee, a small gesture that spoke volumes. They didn't need words. They trusted his call, and now it was clear he saved lives. Maybe in a moment where instinct and conscience had prevailed over protocol. In the days after, the story spread in the battalion, whispered among soldiers who had seen too much to be easily impressed. Among the soldiers, Carr became a quiet hero, not for rebelling or showing off, but for acting when others didn't, for seeing through a trick and saving innocent people with a courage that was both understated and profound. One soldier said it simply. He saw a murder about to happen and stopped it. That's what a soldier does, a sentiment that captured the essence of Carr's choice. The official records were plain, clinical in their brevity. On March 12, 1945, Lieutenant William Carr, leader of Bravo 4, fired one explosive shell at an unapproved target. It destroyed an enemy spot and caused no civilian deaths. No punishment, no award, just a line in a report, a footnote in the vast ledger of war. But for the people of Kalstat, that line meant everything, a single act that preserved their future. Without that one shot, a whole generation might not exist, their lives erased in a moment of calculated cruelty. The village saved and the truth shown. When the shooting stopped, Kalstat was quiet again, its silence heavy with the weight of survival. The Sherman tanks rolled in that afternoon, their engines a low rumble that echoed through the valley, followed by American foot soldiers, their rifles at the ready but unneeded. They found not a battlefield, but a village in shock, its people stunned by the narrowness of their escape. The townspeople didn't run, their courage or exhaustion keeping them rooted in their homes, waiting to see who would take over their future. It was the Americans, their arrival a promise of safety amidst the ruins. When Carr stepped out of his tank into the village square, it felt like another world, a place where the line between enemy and savior blurred into something human. A mom came forward with a child in her arms, her face etched with the strain of survival. The boy, about 3, had a dirty, tear-streaked face but was alive, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. The mom pointed to Carr, then her son, then put her hand on her heart, a gesture that spoke louder than any words. She didn't speak English. Carr didn't speak German. But no words were needed, their shared humanity bridging the gap. U.S. medics came to check the villagers, their presence a lifeline in the aftermath of terror. Most were okay, at least physically, their bodies spared even if their spirits bore the scars of what they'd endured. But in one house's basement, they found something chilling, crates of explosives under wooden beams, wired to blow up with devastating force. The Waffen-SS had made the house a trap, a kill box designed to lure Americans in with civilians, then retreat and blow it up, killing everyone, villagers and soldiers, leaving no witnesses to their cruelty. Carr's shot stopped that, his one shell disrupting the German plan, forcing the enemy to run early and giving the village time to survive, a narrow window that meant everything. The infantry leader wrote in his report, "This could have been Oradour-sur-Glane, a chilling reference to a massacre in France the year before where over 600 civilians died in one day, their lives snuffed out by SS troops in a brutal act of vengeance. But this time it ended differently because one tank leader broke the rules and saw the trap for what it was, his clarity cutting through the fog of war. Because he fired one shot, a precise strike that shattered the enemy's plan. Because he didn't wait for permission to save lives, acting with a courage that defied the constraints of protocol. That night, the villagers gathered in the town square, their faces illuminated by a small fire lit not for a party, but to remember, a quiet act of defiance against the darkness they'd escaped. Carr and his crew were asked to join, their presence a bridge between two worlds. They shared bread and a bottle of homemade liquor, its warmth a small comfort in the cold night. It was quiet, simple, human, a moment of connection amidst the wreckage of war. An older man, through a translator, said, "In war we expect to die, but today, an enemy came to our village and saved us. I'll tell my grandchildren." His words a promise to carry the story forward. Carr listened, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd done. He didn't feel like a hero, didn't believe his actions were flawless or beyond question. But he knew if he had stayed quiet, followed the order without thinking, those people wouldn't be alive. The boy with the dirty face, the teenage girl who helped the wounded, the old woman who lit the fire with shaky hands, her fingers trembling with age and relief. They lived because of a choice made in the mud, in the rain, behind a tank's cracked glass, a decision that balanced on the edge of instinct and morality. And while the war went on elsewhere in Europe, here in this village, because of that choice, there was peace for one night, a fragile moment of calm in a world torn apart. Sometimes that's all history needs, a single act to tip the scales toward hope. After the war ended in May 1945, Lieutenant William Carr went home, leaving behind the battlefields that had shaped him. He didn't ask for a medal or speak at events, shunning the spotlight that others might have sought. When reporters looked for heroes, he said no thanks, his humility as steadfast as his resolve had been in combat. He didn't see himself as one, his actions driven by necessity rather than glory. He went back to Kansas, to the same farm fields he left 3 years before, their familiar contours a balm to a soul wearied by war. He married his high school sweetheart, their love a constant through the years of separation. He raised 2 sons, teaching them the values of hard work and integrity that had guided him. He worked as a mechanic, a job that demanded skill but offered no glamour, a quiet life that suited him. Nothing fancy, nothing big. But sometimes, a letter came from Germany, from Kalstat, arriving like a whisper from a distant past. The writing was sometimes neat, sometimes shaky, the words translated with effort, but the message was always the same. You saved us. One letter came from a boy named Hans Becker, the child Carr saw fall in the mud, his small stumble a moment etched in memory. He was 3 in spring 1945, a fragile life caught in the crosshairs of war. Hans wrote as a teen, his words full of gratitude and wonder. Then as a college student, his letters reflecting a growing awareness of the world. Then as a man, his voice steady with purpose. He said he studied history because of that day, inspired by the moment a stranger chose to act. He chose peace work because of what he saw, dedicating his life to healing the wounds of conflict. His village still remembered the tank leader who shot to protect, not destroy, a figure who had become part of their collective memory. In 1979, Hans Becker became mayor of Kalstat, his leadership a testament to the life he'd been given back. One of his first acts was to make a small memorial in the village square, a gesture born of gratitude rather than grandeur. It wasn't big, just a plaque that said, "To the man who saw us, to the man who chose us," its simple words a powerful tribute to a moment that had changed everything. Every year on March 12th, the village held a quiet walk from the hill to the stone wall where the trap once was, where no one died because someone made sure of it, their steps a silent homage to a choice that echoed through generations. The U.S. Army never spoke publicly about Carr's action, its significance buried in the bureaucracy of war. It wasn't in textbooks or briefings, its details too specific for broad narratives. But in ethics classes for young officers, dealing with tough choices in war, his story was sometimes mentioned, not by name, just as a case, a scenario to provoke thought. A tank leader sees a threat behind civilians. Orders say don't shoot, but lives are at risk. What should he do? The question always sparked debate, voices rising as cadets wrestled with the tension between duty and morality. Some students said follow rules, arguing that structure was the foundation of military life. Others said trust instinct, believing that the front line demanded flexibility. But teachers often ended with this: someone chose to shoot, and that village still exists today, its survival a testament to the power of individual judgment. Carr never knew how far his story spread, didn't seek the recognition that might have come with it. He didn't need to. His peace found in the quiet certainty of his actions. He did what he thought was right and lived quietly with it, his life a study in understated courage. But for one small village across the ocean, he was never forgotten, his name woven into their history like a thread of light. For one boy who grew into a man, a father, a leader, and a voice for peace, it wasn't just a memory. It was the moment his life was given back, a gift that shaped his path and purpose. The final letter. What Carr told his wife about that day. March 12, 1945. That night, after the trap was stopped and the village safe, Lieutenant William Carr sat in his tank, writing on a small notepad by flashlight, its dim glow casting shadows across the cramped interior. It wasn't a report or a confession, no official account meant for the eyes of command. It was a letter to his wife, a piece of his heart committed to paper. He didn't send it right away, the chaos of war delaying its journey. It took weeks to reach her, crossing an ocean to find its way home. But that simple, honest letter, written in pencil on army paper, said more about that day than any report could, its words raw with the weight of truth. He started with normal things, grounding himself in the familiar to anchor his thoughts. He asked about the weather at home, the chickens, if the boys were behaving, their antics a distant echo of a life he longed to return to. He said he missed her cooking most, the memory of her pies a comfort amidst the cold and mud. But then his words changed, shifting to the weight of the day's events. Today I broke the rules. Not small ones you laugh off. I broke a direct order. I was told not to shoot, to wait. But I saw a machine gun behind villagers. I saw kids pushed forward like animals to be killed. I saw soldiers hiding behind women with babies, and I knew what would happen. He stopped, unsure how to explain the clarity that had driven him, the certainty that had steadied his hand. So he tried again. If I had waited, followed the rules exactly, those people would be dead now. 60 or more, including kids like ours. So I shot once, and it was enough. They lived. I might get in trouble. They haven't said yet. Maybe they won't. But I'm writing this not because I'm scared or regret it. I just want you to know what it felt like to realize doing nothing would be worse than doing something wrong. I wasn't trying to be brave or make a point. I just couldn't watch it happen when I could stop it. He ended with a line repeated in Kalstat for years, a sentiment that captured the essence of his choice. I'd rather be judged for breaking a rule than live knowing I followed one that let innocent people die. Carr folded the paper and sealed it, his fingers lingering on the envelope as if sealing a piece of himself within. On the front, he wrote, "For when I come home," a promise to himself and his family. He did come home, the war's end releasing him from its grip. The letter arrived 2 months later, its pages worn but intact. His wife read it once, then again, each word a window into the man she loved. She kept it in a wooden box for life, a treasure more precious than any metal. Years later, after Carr died peacefully in his sleep, a grandchild found the letter and read it at a school Veterans Day event, its words resonating with a new generation. Not because Carr was famous or won medals, but because his story had something rare, a choice, a voice. A reminder that in every war, there are moments where the right thing isn't the loudest, but the quiet voice that says, "Not this time, not today," a whisper that echoes through time, the choice that lasted. History doesn't often remember quiet moments, its pages filled with the clamor of generals, big speeches, victories and headlines that proclaim triumph to the world. But the moments that matter most happen between orders, when one person faces a choice no one else can make, a solitary decision that shapes the course of lives. William Carr didn't ask to be remembered, didn't seek fame or praise, his actions driven by a moral clarity that needed no applause. What he did was quieter than heroism, harder than obedience, a choice rooted in the simple act of seeing. He paid attention, his eyes cutting through the fog of war to discern truth from deception. He trusted his eyes over the radio's noise, believing in what he saw rather than what he was told. He saw fear, force, and danger in faces that reminded him of home, of the people he'd left behind in Kansas, their lives mirrored in the villagers' desperate struggle. And he acted, his decision a spark that illuminated the darkness. No medals, no statues, just lives that went on because one man wouldn't look away, his courage a quiet force that altered the course of a village's history. The people of Kalstat didn't survive because someone followed rules. They survived because someone saw the truth, piercing the veil of deception to act with precision and purpose. That's what makes Carr's story more than a war story. It's a human one, a testament to the power of individual choice in the face of overwhelming odds. Because one day, we'll all face a moment where the right thing isn't written down, where no one tells us what to do, where waiting could hurt and acting might be risky. When that moment comes, we won't have time to prepare, no manual to guide us, no orders to follow. We'll just have to decide, our choices shaping the world in ways we may never fully understand. What surprised you most about this story? Was it the risk he took, the courage to defy a direct order in the face of potential punishment? Or was it the silence of everyone else, the way the system relied on one man's clarity to avert disaster? Leave a comment below. Tell us what you would have done and share this story if it reminded you that doing the right thing doesn't always mean doing what you're told. Because sometimes, history changes not on orders, but on conscience, a quiet force that reshapes the world one choice at a time.